Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking through all the books I read in 2025. I have them all written down over here, give or take a couple that I may have forgot about or not tracked meticulously, but that's life, baby. So I wanted to start off going through my methodology for how I'm thinking through all the books that I read. So I started off thinking, what was my favorite book of the year? Then I wrote that down. Hi, it's Editing Claire, and I just want to say, stay tuned for the end of the video to hear what my favorite book of the year was. I forgot to film it in this part, but I could not leave you guys hanging. And then before checking my Goodreads, my library card, my bookshelf, I wrote down all of the books that I remembered off the top of my head because I figured there might be something interesting there. However, I did that. I had a list of 12 books after that little memory exercise, and I realized it was kind of just the books that I read most recently that I remembered. And then I went through my Goodreads and my library and my bookshelf, and then I wrote down all the books I read in 2024, and I compiled the rest of the list. I picked out a couple of themes off of this exercise, and I'm just gonna go through them. So, the first thing I noticed was, when I was recalling from memory, there was almost, it was just a time-based thing. I remembered the books I read most recently. Secondly, I knew almost none of the authors of the books I read. And then this is where the actual insights of the books are interesting. I tend to gravitate in my nonfiction exploration on books about or written by creatives about their life. And I guess there's literally no surprise, but the creative types that I'm interested in are the ones that I gravitate towards in my day-to-day meanderings on the internet and life. So that means writing, fashion, running. Those were all creatives that I really liked, and that was shown by my absolute adoration of this book, The Designer Who Set Women Free by Elizabeth Evitts Dickinson. It's about Claire McCardell, which has a fantastic name, I might add. And it's just a very pleasant biography on her life as an iconic fashion designer in New York City. I felt really nostalgic towards a New York I didn't know, but am adjacently familiar with as a New York City resident. And there's a couple of fashion design features that she pioneered for women and didn't really get credit for until this book. So that's the wrap dress, the idea of dresses with pockets, and it really inspired me to think about fashion not just from a function perspective, but how it enables us to live the life that we want. Another one was The World She Edited about Katharine White, I think she might be the first editor of The New Yorker. She was definitely the first female one, and she was definitely the first one with the formal title of fiction editor at The New Yorker. And that book I also have actually a physical copy of, so let me grab that. This is another New York-centric book. If you are a reader, a voracious reader of The New Yorker like I am, or if you just have any interest in writers or what it meant to be an illustrious woman in the 1940s to 1960s, this is a fascinating read. It references so many authors that I want to read in the future, and I foresee that future coming into reality very soon. I have this book by John Updike, Rabbit Run. Katharine White actually discovered John Updike, or she was the first person that published him when he was, I think, a senior in college. So she really had an eye for pioneering young authors, and she cultivated her relationships with them throughout her entire life. So another massively inspirational book. Third in this first category of books about creatives is a classic if you're a runner like me. Murakami, who I've read his fiction before. This is my first nonfiction, and it might be his only nonfiction book. What I talk about when I talk about running, I did 9+1 this past year, and this was very inspirational. It has a very balanced way of thinking about running. he doesn't focus on the athletic part, as weird as that sounds. He really focuses on the mental clarity it brings to one's life. And for me, I resonated with that because personally I didn't run for any glory. I am chasing a goal time now, but we'll talk about that another day. Fourth book in this first category is Be Ready When the Luck Happens. I read this on my Kindle. It's about Ina Garten, who is a food personality I'm not too familiar with. Of course, I've seen her stuff. Who could forget the massive martini during COVID? But it was just an entertaining read. She has a bit of an unrelatable life, I have to say, and her attitude is a bit aloof at times, but you cannot deny that the woman is an entertainer. I did read Wear It Well by Allison Bornstein. Are you sensing a trend in my interests? Fashion and food, yeah. But that was just a pleasant guide. Okay, the next category of books that I read were food-related narratives. Ooh, so there were 2 books in this category, Butter and Piglet. Butter was written by a Japanese novelist, I think, and her descriptions were so vivid and her outlook on life was just, again, very balanced. Whereas Piglet had a romance horror kind of vibe. They were both kind of challenging reads. I think any book about a woman who's into food, it always touches on the topics of body image and balancing loving cooking and eating food and the consumption of it, which a hairy topic in this Ozempic era, or just like being a woman that's exposed to mass media. Nonetheless, Butter had some great descriptions and it really touched me beyond the food descriptions, which were of course fantastic. So I'm just gonna give a little quote here. A warm loyalty coursed through her words like a pulse. So simple, such a simple, relatable description, and Butter is filled with them. This one is a little bit more philosophical, but it stuck out to me. Right. If God exists, he wouldn't take joy or satisfaction in the sight of suffering, which means you don't have to get through everything alone. You don't have to always be growing as a person either. The far more important thing is just to get through the day. This stuck with me, and I think it'll stick with a lot of people because we just have very high expectations for ourselves. And there's a difference between setting high expectations, being ambitious, but then beating yourself up for not achieving these lofty ambitions. And this was kind of a theme for me this year, feeling settled with myself and happy with who I am at my core outside of what I did that day, what I did that week, and growing. You know, it's very important to grow in aggregate over the course of a year, a lifetime, a relationship, a training cycle. But you don't have to be constantly growing. Like, we were not put on this earth to expand, you know? Okay, now we're on to category number 3. These are more challenging stories in that they weren't light reads and you couldn't just whip them out on the subway necessarily, unless it was a long ride. But they all had an edge of romance or adventure. They were just good books, good, entertaining, well-written books. So in this category, I had 4. First was The Book of Love. Next was The Adventures of Amina al-Sirah. Next was The Familiar, which was a great book. And then The Safe Key, or The Safe Keep. I don't want to get too into every single one of these books because this video is getting very long. But they're just beautifully written stories of love and adventure, filled with wonderful writing and characters that feel like a friend. The next category is a bit of easier reads. These are books that you can recommend to someone that wants to get into reading again, you know? Someone says to you, I want to get into reading, I just can't get it. I just can't get reading to stick. Here are some massively entertaining books that will keep you entertained, but also will contribute to your sense of feeling alive because the characters are that good. So first is Vera Wang's Guide to Snooping on a Dead Man. There was that book and the second book in this very wonderful, likable character. She's a Chinese grandma, and as someone with a Chinese grandma, I just love thinking about the idea of this wonderful human being a detective. And then next were The Girl with a Dragon Tattoo. That entire series was fantastic. I read all of them. I absolutely gobbled them down. They're kind of, he's a very blunt writer, and it's very fast-paced. I would say this was not character-driven. The characters were kind of very unlikable, but the plot is exciting, and it's really easy to bang out. Next was Wedding People. This one was a little bit heavier, but still in that like romance type of category. Is it worth reading? I don't know, but if you're really just like new to reading and you know you like romance, this might be a good way to dip your toe in, even though there's some darker themes there. Next is The Doorman. This was a great book about a doorman in New York City, and again, I love a New York-centric story. It makes it feel like all the rent I'm paying here is worth it because now I can relate to these fictional characters. Okay, and then the next category is mysteries. I really enjoyed mysteries this year. Mysteries, thrillers, nothing too gory, but we have Long Island Compromise, a fantastic read about a Jewish family on Long Island. What do you know? Famous Last Words, The Shadow of the Wind, which I read in preparation for my trip to Barcelona. And then the plot, and then lastly, the sequel. The last category of books, things that were kind of duds or I didn't quite gobble down. So first is Camino Island. I had read a New York Times article about this guy who had read thousands of books upon his death, and the author of Camino Island, who I'm forgetting his name, but he was his most read author, so I figured I'd give it a shot, and it was just a very mediocre kind of murder story, easy beach read. And then the second one was All the Things Are Too Small, which is a book of essays that are anti-minimalism. Now, this book was very good, but you needed to be in a very specific type of you needed to be in a very specific pensive mood in order to read, and I just find that I'm not often enough in that mood to get through it, and it was clogging up my Libby, so I had to get rid of it. And some of these essays really stuck with me because in this world where there's so much digital stimulation, AI slop, social media, 1,000 different things bidding for your attention, there is a really human impulse to want to cut away everything and cut through the noise by culling your life of physical objects and obligations and tasks and notebooks and physical books and photos. And this book kind of argues against that. In that, should elimination, minimalism be the goal of life? Or aren't we here to collect experiences, collect memories, and put these experiences and memories in conversation with each other to inform the decisions we make, the people we hang out with, and the way we spend our time? You can only understand what works for you through the collection of things. So this book was impactful because it kind of led to my November-December spending spree because I was like, oh yeah, life, experience, objects. So I liked the essay. I liked that specific essay. The book, I think I might need to revisit like a physical copy instead of reading it on my Kindle to really dive into the more serious topics. Okay, I think that actually covers all the books I read in 2025. Okay, wait, I'm sorry, there's one more. This is a collection of short essays on food and writing in 2025. I bought this in 2021 also, and the stories are not as delicious as I hope sometimes, but it's still good to have around. I keep it on my dining room table. I read a story or two here and there, and there is just like a good collection of writing here. So I'm a little lukewarm on this. I'm definitely happy I have it, and it's just a nice reference point, a physical touch point of my love of food and writing. Before I end off the video, I just want to tell you guys what my favorite book of the year was. I thought about this a lot, and honestly, I could probably find a way to make almost 50% of the books in here my favorite, but ultimately the one that stuck out in my mind was The Safekeep by Yael Vanderwooden. And this is from the complex romance category, but it's really not so much a romance. That's just the easiest way to bucket it from my themes. But really, it's a historical drama about family and love and identity. And it was hauntingly beautiful and literally brought me to tears at one point. And if you read the book, you'll know when. I just want to share a quote so you can get kind of a flavor for the writing of the book, because not only is the story really good and there's a really devastating twist, the author, Yael, is a beautiful writer. So this is a quote that, when I was looking through all my highlights, really stuck out to me, and is something that I feel right now, here in January. So this is the quote. "January lowered itself over Amsterdam and would not rise again. The clouds stayed close to building tops, and yesterday's snow would not be rolled away. It turned to sludge and turned to ice in the drains. Isabel stood and shook." I hope you enjoyed this recap of all the books I read in 2025. How many times can I say it? Let me know if you have any recommendations for 2026. I'm happy to go deeper into any of these stories, maybe do a video on how to read more in 2025, or what my thought process is behind the books I select. Thank you so much for bearing with me. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you in the next video.